Welcome to Bigfoot Adventures. Have you ever had a Bigfoot sighting? If you have and you don't want to let anybody know that it was you that saw him, or you're afraid to tell your story because you're afraid of you being made fun of, I'd be glad to tell your story for you. All you have to do is email me your story at bigfootadventures411@gmail.com. Let me know what you want me to say, what you don't want me to say, and I can put your story out there so other people can hear about it without you being identified. We just had a hurricane here in Florida, and it got me to thinking about, what do the Bigfoots do in bad storms like that? Where do they go to take shelter? What's your thoughts on that? Leave me a comment. But, I had heard a story here in Florida, and I couldn't find the story. I looked for it everywhere, but I did read about it. It might have been in a newspaper one year, where we had a hurricane that came through, and a family of Bigfoots was seen walking through an orange grove. I couldn't find the story, so I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you this. This story that I'm going to tell you about comes from an area near Mobile, Alabama. And Mobile, Alabama is where I'm from. There was 6 of us girls growing up, 6 of us, and we were all cousins. And we would all sit up at night, the 6 females, and we would tell scary stories sitting right on the edge of the woods in Alabama where it's real dark. Now, I know you would probably hear me and say, well, you don't sound like you're from Alabama, but that's because I've been in Florida pretty much all of my life. But I can tell you, we told some really cool stories. We were always trying to, scare each other and come up with the different stories. And I know one of the stories we always told was about the Bigfoot. And even as a child, listening to these stories, I wasn't sure if they really exist, but I always thought maybe so. So this next story is about a young man that lived just outside of Mobile, Alabama, and it was right after a hurricane, and this is his story. He says, it was a few days after Hurricane Frederick. I was 11 years old at the time. We lived in a trailer on Hurricane Road, and my grandparents owned the Hurricane Landing and Fish Camp. It's now called Perkins Landing. We were left without power after the hurricane, so all our food was on ice. It was about 11 p.m. and my dad asked me to walk to my grandparents' store and get some ice. So I grabbed a flashlight and took off walking. It was less than a quarter of a mile from our house to the store, and I was very used to walking the route on a daily basis. So I'm walking down the left side of the road, and I can hear the barking of dogs, and they're really cutting up. They belonged to an older man who lived at a little white house down the road on the right. He kept them in a pen behind the house, so when I get there, in front of his house, I shine my flashlight, around his house, looking, to see what the dogs are barking at. And suddenly I see something very large run from behind the house on 2 legs. I followed it with my light as it ran toward the woods. Then it stopped and turned and looked at me, its eyes glowing red in the dark. And all of a sudden it runs straight at me. It was so fast. It traveled about 30 to 40 yards in just a flash. And then it stopped right at the edge of the road. I was scared frozen. I couldn't scream or run. And we just stood there for what seemed like an eternity, but in actuality was probably just a second or two. Then suddenly it let out a high-pitched growling sound. Then I screamed and it turned and ran. I ran all the way home. When I got home, I was so upset I could hardly breathe or talk. My parents finally calmed me down, and I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me. The next day, my dad and my uncle went down there to look for tracks, but they didn't find any. My uncle told me I probably saw a bear, but even I know a bear can't run on two legs. The creature I saw was extremely large. I would have to say probably at least 7 feet tall, with very broad shoulders. It was covered from head to toe in dark brown black hair. Its mouth was large with square teeth. Kind of stuck out to me that it had square teeth. The rest of the face and the eyes were sunken in. As a veteran, I can tell you that I've never been this scared in my life. To me, that's an incredible story. But, it makes me wonder, what do they do in the hurricanes? Do they go out, looking around, trying to get into things, trying to find food? What do they do? So if you have any idea or any thoughts on that, please leave me a comment. I appreciate you listening to my stories. And until next time, I'll see you then.